Welcome, everyone. I'm Sharon Durkin. I'm the chair of the Boston Ward 5 Democrats. Thank you for joining our forum tonight. We're about to have a really important discussion about Boston's future, and we're so excited. The Boston Ward 4 and Ward 5 Democratic committees are frequent collaborators on candidate forums that provide opportunities for conversations on the most pressing issues facing our city, state, and nation. Our committees advocate for the election of Democrats at the local, state, and national level. In addition, we support public policies that are important to Boston, to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and to the nation. And we help our neighbors stay informed. I'll take a second to familiarize you with our Zoom features for tonight's call. If for any reason we lose connection or power, check your email for an updated Zoom link. If you receive any questions from anyone who's unable to join tonight, we are live streaming on the Boston Ward 5 Democrats, Facebook, and we're also live streaming on the Boston Ward 4 Democrats Facebook. Should you need or want, closed captioning is available by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom right of your screen. Tonight, we are excited to be joined by moderator, the matchless Callie Crossley. Callie is a Boston-based radio and TV host, commentator, and public speaker. Her Monday morning commentaries on GBH's Morning Edition tackle wide-ranging subject matter. She appears on Beat the Press, examining local and national media coverage, and she hosts Basic Black, which focuses on current events concerning communities of color. She's a frequent commentator on television and radio, and we're so honored she can join us tonight as our moderator for this evening's forum. Thank you so much, Callie. We really, really appreciate it, and take it away.
Thanks a lot, Sharon. Welcome, candidates. Glad to see you this evening. To the audience, I'm going to give them, each of them, a very brief introduction. They have robust bios online, so I urge you to please find them and review those. But for now, let me introduce each of them. John Barros is the former Chief of Economic Development for the City of Boston. He was appointed in 2014 by former Mayor Marty Walsh. Andrea Campbell is District 4 Boston City Councilor, representing parts of Boston's Dorchester, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain, and Roslindale. She was elected in 2015. Annissa Essaibi George is City Councilor at Large, Chair of the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery, and she was elected in 2015. John Santiago is a medical doctor and state representative representing the 9th Suffolk District South End, parts of Roxbury, Back Bay.
Doug.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Elected in 2019. Michelle Wu is City Councilor at Large, elected in 2013. And she's the first Taiwanese American and first Asian American woman elected to the City Council. Now, Acting Mayor Kim Janey had agreed to join us, but she got called away for late-breaking events. One of the late-breaking events, of course, was the Derek Chauvin verdict was announced this afternoon. I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that in a minute, but I want to start off the conversation this way. First, John Barros, what is the one quality or experience that you think makes you uniquely qualified to be the mayor of Boston?
First, let me just thank Ward 5 and Ward 4 for putting this on, and Callie, you for moderating. The one unique strength that I think I bring to this is executive management skills. I've managed a very complex process at the community level in transforming a part of Roxbury and Dorchester, creating affordable housing, parks, open space, the largest urban land trust in the country, and expanding the economy and helping to create more jobs. As Chief of Economic Development, I've done it at a citywide level, where I've helped Boston move to a more smart growth approach to development, creating value while investing in things like affordable housing and workforce development at record pace and record levels.
15 seconds. Andrea Campbell, same question to you. What is the one characteristic or experience that makes you uniquely qualified to be Boston's mayor?
First of all, thank you, Callie, and thank you to Ward 4 and 5 for hosting. I have a robust professional background, including being a lawyer and, of course, a city councilor. But I think the thing that makes me unique is my lived experience. And I talk about that quite a bit. Every issue that I work on, with whether it's having to do with racial injustice, of course, policing reform, education, so many issues all connect back to a very painful story in the loss of my twin brother, and the question of how do two twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes. For me, this work has always been about breaking generational cycles of poverty, trauma, criminalization, and so much more. And I think that's one of the characteristics that makes me absolutely unique amongst the candidates.
Annissa, Essaibi, George, same question to you. Can you hear?
There we go. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I'm coming in live from home and the household is existing around me. Thank you, Callie. Thank you, Sharon. My name is Annissa Essaibi George. I'm very proud to be here with all of you in my capacity, not just as an at-large city councilor, but candidate for mayor of Boston, and excited to be a part of this race. I'd say there are a few things that I think uniquely qualify me for this job, for this role, and to serve in that capacity as mayor of the city of Boston. But the one I'd say is top of list and top of mind, and certainly key to most of my experiences and what informs most of what I have done on the Boston City Council is my 13 years in the classroom at East Boston High School as a Boston Public Schools teacher. Through that experience, I had a front row seat working with our students from across the city, of course, many of them from the community of East Boston, and saw firsthand the challenges they had in the classroom, both in academics, as well as in the impacts of their life on their experience in the classroom, thinking about the socioeconomic implications, thinking about the racial implications, and thinking about the issues of trauma and poverty that they brought every day with them to the classroom. I'm grateful to be here with all of you and look forward to tonight's discussion.
John Santiago, same question.
Great. Well, thank you to Ward 4 and 5 for hosting this important forum, and to Ms. Crossley for moderating. Look, I think what makes me unique is that I've dedicated my entire life to public service. You know, I'm a state representative. As you said, I have the privilege of serving on the front lines as an ER doctor at Boston Medical Center, where I still work today. You know, I'm a captain in the Army who's deployed abroad, and I was a former Peace Corps volunteer who's really committed his life to working with those underserved. I mean, my life has been about service, and the only reason why I ran for office the first time, and why I jumped into this race for mayor, is fundamentally based on the idea that you, my neighbors, and my patients, you know, deserve the best representation in City Hall. You know, because what we've experienced this year with COVID, economic recession, racial unrest, is going to require strong public leadership. And so I'm running for mayor to bring Boston back stronger than ever, to lead us through this crisis, and to recovery rooted in two things: equity and opportunity. Because this moment, I would argue, transcends politics as usual, and it's going to require leaders committed to getting things done. And I've done that my whole life in the Army, in the Peace Corps, on the front lines, and in the State House.
Michelle Wu.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Ward 4 and 5, and thank you, Callie, for creating the space tonight. I think it's especially needed after the news of the day, and just one more reminder of how deep our structurally racist systems stretch, how much has been on the minds, the hearts, the financial burdens of families over this last year. In this moment, we need to do more to change these systems. And what I bring to this race is a vision for Boston to be bold, to reach for where we are dreaming, to build coalitions to actually get that done. I have a track record with 8 years on the city council and time working in City Hall for Mayor Menino prior to that, doing exactly that, taking on the fights that we were told would be impossible, taking on Airbnb to keep rents down across the city, getting Boston to be one of the first cities in the country to pass paid parental leave, taking on equity in city contracting. We've gotten it done through building coalitions and not being afraid of taking on those fights. We'll get that done for the city to change our systems.
All right, so as Councilor Michelle Wu just indicated, we did have late breaking news that is very impactful. The verdict in the Derek Chauvin case came down this afternoon. He was 3 counts of guilty, second degree, third degree, and manslaughter. There is a lot of comment. There's been a lot of comment around the country, including right here in Boston and in Massachusetts. But as we all know, the case is actually bigger than the one case. It has implications for policing everywhere and certainly here in Boston. So first, I would like just each of you to respond to the verdict, and then I'm going to circle back and we'll talk a little bit more about police reform. So John Santiago, what's your response?
Great. Thank you for Callie. I can't start my comments tonight without reflecting about what happened just about an hour ago. I think we've taken a step toward justice in the Derek Chauvin guilty verdict, but nothing can change the fact that George Floyd's life was cut short in a ruthless display of violence and hate. And I hope this moment really marks the beginning of a national healing as we confront our own racial reckoning, because it's incumbent upon us to continue to root out racism, brutality, and abuses of power. And so as we embark on this mayor's race, and this is the second forum we're having, when I guess Mayor Janey will join us later, I'm recommitting myself to fighting for justice in every which way.
Annissa, Essaibi, George?
Thank you very much. For this day, which I know is so difficult for so many of us, we know that this verdict is not enough. This isn't justice. It never will make up for the loss of George Floyd and countless others. This work needs to continue as we rid our country certainly of racism, and the fight certainly doesn't stop here. As mayor, I will push for critical reforms, including expanding implicit bias training, getting mental health services to our residents, and reforming the gang database and stepping out community outreach. It's so important that when we work in partnership with community and police, that moves our city to a true community policing model and works to make sure that we have a city that is both safe and just. The work doesn't stop with one verdict. The work doesn't stop with this case. The work must continue day in and day out. And as mayor of the city of Boston, I will do that work.
Andrea Campbell.
Well, I will say, hearing, it's been a tough couple of weeks, obviously, with the murder of Daunte Wright, a 13-year-old child in this country. So the verdict brought some relief, not only to me, but also I think many others. And I hope some sense of peace for the family. But sadly, we know that if this was not caught on video, this probably would not have happened. And so the sad and shameful reality is it took this being on video, a man being stepped on for over 9 minutes to get accountability and to get a police officer convicted. This is often, sadly, not the result of so many families. I talk about the loss of my twin brother, Andre, who died while in the custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons, when he was only 29 years old. He was in custody for 2 years. He died 9 years ago, and my family still does not know under what circumstances he passed. So there's still major work to do to ensure that every family has equitable access to justice, and there's still significant work to do to transform our public safety systems to ensure they're transparent and
Michelle Wu.
I agree with so much of what has been said. It's a drop of relief after the verdict, but not justice. George Floyd should still be alive. Daunte Wright should still be alive. So many others should still be alive. And we have seen this pandemic shut down so much about our lives, right? Freeze so many things, air travel and business and movement. And yet the continued reminders, the continued killings of Black Americans at the hands of police, this is an issue that is just the tip of the surface for how much racism is pervading all of our structures. In Boston, as a mom, I will never forget seeing the footage of what happened in Minneapolis. I will never forget, and I will make sure that we put all of our energy to changing systems, policing, education, creating generational wealth. We have the ability to do it. We just need to be bolder and to make it happen.
John Barros.
Callie, watching the verdict and after the verdict, I didn't realize I was holding my breath the whole time. But after the 3 guilties, I was able to exhale. And then I quickly remembered that George can't exhale. He tried to breathe, but he can't breathe. And then you quickly remind yourself of all of the Black men and Black folks out there and people of color who can't breathe. And so it's not justice. And I remember going numb, knowing that the battle still continues. I remember going numb right after the verdict because we know that one victory doesn't bring justice. It does put us on the right path. It sends the right message, but we've got a long, long way to go. I called some friends. We had conversations. I called a friend of mine who was with me when we actually had a police encounter that was really violent, and almost brought me to tears. And so I remember being triggered immediately afterwards. And it's a really sad day for America, because we should be celebrating justice, but this is not justice yet.
Okay, so in your role as mayor, you will be diving into the police reform bill that has been passed. The commission is supposed to be meeting soon. They've missed a couple of the early gathering deadlines as they come together. But this is, as we've said, a huge issue right here in Boston. So how do you see moving ahead with the commission and what's on the table now for police reform? Is that enough, Andrea Campbell?
Thank you, Callie, for the question. So I have been leading the way when it comes to policing reform, and accountability and transparency are critically important. Folks, not only nationally, of course, but locally are calling for this. I didn't need George Floyd, his murder, the recent Patrick Rose case, or other cases coming out of our department to know that the Boston Police Department has significant work to do to ensure transparency and accountability. I had to subpoena, as a Boston City Councilor, our own police department to get data from them. In asking them for stop and frisk data, what I discovered was that of close to 70% of the stops in 1 year were Black residents, even though we only make up a quarter of the population. And these racial inequities are only getting worse in the city of Boston. As mayor, I will push for an open data initiative to ensure that this information is released automatically. The Office of Police Accountability, I drafted that legislation, worked with the mayor to get it done. My leadership will continue with respect to these issues.
Annissa, Essaibi, George. Can you hear me?
Thank you again. Yeah, no, sorry, I did have to mute again. I think that it's so important that we continue to make sure here in the city of Boston that we're making the accommodations necessary to meet the state reform and make sure that it is jiving and matching what we're doing at the city level. It is really important for us to make sure that we are able to do that and make sure that we're able to manage public safety at the same time. We will continue through my administration to push for the critical reforms, including the expanding that implicit bias training that I referenced earlier, and making sure that we are pulling together and putting in place a police force that is reflective of the community. Those things all need to happen at the same time. We can do multiple things at the same time. It's also important to look at what's happening at the state level and see how that's going to impact the day-to-day operations of our Boston Police Department, and make sure that we have accommodations in place to do all of it, because it is all so important.
John Santiago.
Thank you, Callie. There is no question that our criminal justice system has been and continues to be stacked up against communities of color. We need to look at the entire criminal justice system. That's including police. We need to implement structural reforms to begin to undo decades of racism, discrimination, and harm done. However, we have to ensure that police can guarantee public safety and provide appropriate services. I'm proud that alongside my colleagues in the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, I helped lead the effort on Beacon Hill to pass some of the most comprehensive and progressive police reform packages in the country. They both created a police oversight commission. We restricted no-knock warrants, we prohibited chokeholds, and we restricted qualified immunity. Look, as mayor, I am committed to a budget that best reflects the city's needs, and one that will include also the reduction of police services. I want to create a community crisis diversion program, importing some of the best community policing models across the country, to make sure that our police don't have to respond to every 911 call. I want to create services that appropriately address what's.
Okay, Michelle Wu.
I'm just sitting in the feeling of the other news of the day as well. And the final release of the internal affair files for a police officer who had been, there was evidence of abuse of children and yet stayed on the job, rose to leadership in the job. We've had recent news in Boston of overtime fraud within the police department. We've had recent news, officer caught on video bragging about hitting demonstrators with a car, and that footage not released, withheld after public records request after request, only until there was a lawsuit and investigative journalism to uncover it. So we need deep changes here. You know, I'm proud of my track record of working in community and in coalition to make sure that we were banning racist technology-based surveillance and adding protections to make sure we're seeing oversight over surveillance, but it's not enough. None of it is enough. We need to have transformational change, reallocate, get things out of the department that should be a public health lens, make sure there's.
All right, John Barros.
Thank you, Callie. You know, in light of today's verdicts, we need to make sure that BPD's use of force policies are enhanced, updated, and that we've got clear articulation of how we're going to enforce the infractions with disciplinary codes that are really clear. We've had some advancements in this space, but we need to take it a lot further. Then we need to adopt practices that make sure that we have maximum accountability on any kind of infraction, in any kind of way for BPD, maximum transparency, maximum public access to BPD's investigations. It starts with fully implementing the Office of Public Accountability and Transparency, but we can't have a police officer who's being accused of something like bragging about hitting protesters with his car, and then all of a sudden shows back up on the force and is working, and nobody knows what happened. We need to make sure that we formalize and we make sure that the commitments for diversity in BPD are real, and that we can continue to make sure that BPD looks like the city. And then finally, I want to say,
All right. Let me follow up and ask this question. If you're going to make cuts to the BPD budget, how much and where should the money be redirected? John Barros, I'll let you start.
Thank you. So we need to make sure that, you know, BPD gets called for everything. They get calls for mental health. They get calls for substance abuse issues. They get calls for DV. As mayor, I would set up a new public agency with trained professionals to deal with those calls. We have to have seamlessness, and then we need to make sure that those professionals show up in a way that is trained for de-escalation. And if they need police, they can call police, but we got to make sure that police aren't answering to those calls. Police shouldn't be answering to behavioral issues in schools either. We need to make sure that we've got trained professionals in all of our schools that are dealing with those issues. If you have an issue at school, their arrest shouldn't be the first response.
Are you redirecting money?
Yes, Callie. Then there would be money that would be redirected from police to those that new agency, to those new professionals, and to the community organizations that are doing those work and handling some of the root causes of violence.
Okay, where would you reduce the budget, Michelle Wu, and where would you redirect, or should it be reduced, and where would you redirect those monies?
Yes, I've put forward a proposal to ensure that we are making structural changes to the department and the budget, that so much of what is coming before the department is actually not the best situation for armed law enforcement to show up, not serving our residents, and also causing risk and harm. And so we need to be structurally changing this department. There's taxi licensing that's in the police department. There's school police that should not be in our schools. And so we need to really dig into how we're going to shift these into the appropriate places. We need to invest in mental health and in community stabilization, substance use, and make sure that at the end of the day, having accountability once something has gone wrong is already too late. This is about truly creating prosperity, stability, opportunity for our communities so that every resident can thrive in Boston, and we're delivering safety and health across every community.
But to be clear, you would cut the budget to move the money.
Reallocate funding.
All right, okay. John Santiago. Wait, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There we go, now.
Oh, great, thanks, Callie. You know, I commit to a budget that best reflects the city's needs, and one that will include a reduction in the demand of police services to reallocate them to more public health oriented priorities. As I was saying earlier, you know, I want to create a community crisis diversion program importing some of the best community policing models throughout this country. I want the city's resources to appropriately respond to the increasing 911 calls. Listen, I'm an ER physician, and every Friday, Saturday night when I work hand in hand with the BPD. And trust me, given the rise of mental health issues, substance use, you name it, the police don't want to be doing that, right? So we can reduce their demand and put our police, our EMS, and city resources in a position to succeed so that our city can succeed and deliver the best care and save money at the same time.
Andrea Campbell.
First of all, I believe in leading with integrity and keeping your word. So in the last City of Boston's budget cycle, I voted against the budget because it did not reallocate enough from the police department's budget. I'm the only candidate who has committed to cutting the police department's budget by 10%, $50 million, which is what I was saying as councilor when I voted against the last budget. I'm the only candidate that has a plan to actually get that done with specifics. I would redirect that $50 million to the root causes of violence, trauma, mental health, moving people out of poverty. Critically important because police alone cannot solve the issue of violence in the city of Boston. It has to be done in partnership with community-based organizations and folks who've been doing the work on the ground in the community for a really long time.
Annissa Essaibi George.
Thanks, Callie, for the question. And, for me, I do believe that we have to invest in community programs to get to the root causes of injustice in our system and our city at large, and to work to end the violence and the trauma that so many of our residents face. But I do not support defunding the police. Chances are, if you're ending up in our justice system, it's so many of our other systems that have failed you along the way. And that's why we need to really invest in those community programs. We have to decriminalize poverty, substance use disorder, homelessness, and mental illness. I have worked as a member of the Boston City Council to increase the number of clinicians who are doing the work on the street in partnership and to complement the work of the Boston Police Department. I know also that it sounds counterintuitive, but to decrease our police overtime budget, which we spend a great deal of our time talking about, we go over that overtime budget because we do not have enough police officers on the street. We need to work to make sure that our officers our Boston Police Department is fully staffed and functioning.
So to be clear, defunding to you means not cutting the budget, the police department budget.
That is true.
Okay, all right. Did I get Michelle Wu, did I get to you?
Yes.
Yes, all right, we're good. I want to move on to another subject. I mean, we may circle back to that. There was a recent survey taken, and two of the big issues for people who were surveyed, voters, housing, one, and COVID relief, the other. So let's start with housing. Boston has this Boston Planning and Development Agency, which is unusual in most places, and they do the planning and development together. Do you support eliminating the BPDA, Andrea Campbell?
No, first of all, thank you, Callie, for the question. No, I think we do need a planning agency. I think it needs to be transformed immediately. I'm a district counselor. I cover and have to deal with every single development project that comes in my district. And what I have heard from residents, those who are doing construction and development, is their lack of process. It's time consuming, it's not predictable, or maybe at different moments, the process is rigged because everyone shows up to oppose a project, and at the end of the day, the project goes through. But the next week, a similar project doesn't go through. And so we need to reform the system and the culture within it. I want to actually build a civic engagement team within the BPDA that is better at actually doing civic engagement. I also want to hire folks who are experts and have greater expertise in terms of planning. And I absolutely think there's a way in which to do cultural shift and have accountability all at the same time.
All right, John Barros.
Yeah, absolutely not, Callie. If you were to get rid of the BPDA, you'd create a lot more lack of transparency. It's a regulatory body. You need to improve the BPDA. You've got to create some consistency and transparency. We have to double the amount of staff and resources we spend on planning. The BPDA needs to take planning seriously. And right now, planning plays second fiddle to development. As an executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, I used some of the urban renewal tools of the BPDA to help improve our neighborhood. We used eminent domain to assemble land to create the largest urban land trust in the country. We used the 121A to make sure that the community got what the community wanted when we did planning. So the BPDA could use to empower community plans and implement them. It's about usage and how we walk out the process, not the BPDA.
Michelle Wu.
Look, I've just heard so many stories across our city of how urgent the issues of housing affordability and this is something that I've lived. I'm grateful to have a 2-family home in Boston, in Roslindale, where just the summer after we'd purchased this, we wouldn't have been able to afford to buy in this very same neighborhood. Our system is irretrievably broken, right? We are a city that has permitted the greatest amount of square footage in the most climate vulnerable area. The seaport already floods regularly. There's no equity. There's no transportation out of that district. This is a city where developers were seriously talking about investing $100 million plus in purchasing and building a gondola system to fly people out of traffic because we have failed so much at connecting transportation planning to development and housing. We need big changes. You're going to hear that changing it is too hard, too complicated. That is music to developers' ears. We need to start and build a separate planning agency, have our long-term holistic planning set for city, clear rules.
Annissa Essaibi George.
Thanks for the question. And I will say that I do not believe in dismantling the BPDA. I do support breaking up the BPDA and creating an independent public office of planning. That supporting, creating that separate office allows much more forward thinking, but inclusive planning for the development of our city. I've introduced legislation calling to reform the notification process to ensure that residents do have advance notice of developments so that they can express their concerns and participate very actively, participate and engage in the development of their neighborhoods. A planning office would prioritize the needs and the wants and the realities of our neighborhoods and our neighbors. And its employees should be reflective of our city and its neighborhoods and have a true understanding, an in-depth understanding of each one of our city's neighborhoods, their uniqueness, and how special they are to the residents that call it home today.
John Santiago.
Thank you, Callie. We have to focus on equitable, smart, and sustainable development that is community-centered and led. We have a zoning code, an Article 80 process that is outdated, antiquated, and frustrates everyone involved. As a state representative, I was quite hesitant to get involved, given my role on Beacon Hill. And the only reason I got involved in development issues at the local level is because my community didn't feel like they had a voice. Whether it was stopping a poorly planned marijuana dispensary in the South End or working with Back Bay residents to effectively stop the sale of the Heinz, I partnered with neighbors and made sure their voices were heard. And that's what's missing today. And so as mayor, I want to make sure that all neighborhoods are engaged throughout the development process. I want to implement a realistic 21st century zoning reform that is informed by neighbors and incentivizes things that I care about, things like transit-oriented development, things like affordable housing and green development. I want to modernize the Article 80 process to provide more effective engagement. And that's what the city of Boston needs, not to completely abolish the BPDA, but to reform it.
All right, so don't get rid of it, reform it is your answer.
Correct.
Okay, just want to be clear. Andrea, did I get to you? No, yes. I got everybody. All right, so, Annissa Essaibi George, you said you want to keep it, but split up some pieces. Why would that be different? In other words, what does it look like if there's no BPDA? I know you don't want it to go away, so tell me how your plan of reform and splitting apart two major pieces of it would work.
Well, I think it's really important to make sure that they aren't in competition with each other. When we think about planning, it really does need to be rooted in community conversation. It needs to be rooted in neighborhood discussion. And we need to make sure that our city does reflect. We want our city to continue to grow. I believe in growth. I think that's really important for our city. But I also think that it's important that as our neighborhoods grow, that it's an aesthetically pleasing growth, that it is a sensible growth, that it is smart growth. And those shifts and those changes as they come along have to be properly planned out. It can't be reactionary. It has to be proactive and very, very thoughtful through that process. And it has to include community.
All right. So John Barros, you say keep it. So what is it? It's just going to look the same. We go forward the same way it's been operating as far as you're concerned?
No, we would create more capacity on the planning side. the challenge with the BPDA and planning right now in the city is that the BPDA plans for what the private market or the private sector can do. So all plans start with a community vision, the community plans, and then it moves the plan closer to what developers can pay for. We have to stop that. We have to be true to what the neighborhood's visions are, what their plans are, what their dreams are, and where they want to go. And then the city needs to step in and make sure that that can happen. Now, sometimes it'll mean in neighborhood planning that we're bringing innovative tools and creating DIFs or TIFs, tax incentive financing or district improvement financing to a plan to make sure it can happen. Or we subsidize for more affordable housing, go deeper. We should no longer allow our planning to be dictated by what the private market can pay for, or else we're always going to cheat the resident vision and the resident plans.
What's it look like afterwards or going forward, Andrea Campbell, if you have your way?
One, there is a civic engagement bureau in the BPDA. Currently, there are a lot of folks in various populations, including our immigrant communities, that feel as though they're not engaged at all. So more robust civic engagement, I think, critically important. It also has to be proactive. This is the department where good luck trying to find the notice about the meeting, the information, the plans. We should proactively be releasing this information, posting on the website, so it's easy to find and so folks can participate in these development conversations and there's no surprises. I also think cutting process where we all agree it's a good project. So for example, affordable housing projects that are deeply affordable, I think they should be removed from the Article 80 process. And so there are other ways in which to improve processes to actually build faster and meet the needs of residents in the city of Boston. And then lastly, I do think we have some incredible planners at the BPDA.
10 seconds.
And so how do we give them more tools to be able to reach every neighborhood, to get a greater sense of what every neighborhood needs in terms of housing, infrastructure, and then develop in response to that.
Okay, Michelle, well, you're throwing it out. So how do you envision it?
We need an independent city planning agency that's accountable, that has the power and the resources to truly set new rules, an updated zoning code. Our zoning code hasn't been changed in a comprehensive citywide way since 1965. It's basically no rules right now. And so nearly every new development has to get some combination of exceptions from the Zoning Board of Appeals or from the BPDA itself. That leads to a political, opaque, complex process, expensive process. So we're actually losing resources that could be used for affordability, for climate resiliency, for transportation access. We need to make sure that we are setting those rules, having a development agency that is accountable to the city, and that we are moving more in line with so many other cities across the country where there's a true commitment to planning. Again, there's incredible staff working on this, but when planning and development are collapsed together, planning always gets subsumed by profit and by private development.
All right. So John Santiago, specifics about what you would do.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Callie, every neighborhood I go to in the city of Boston, there are issues with respect to development, and both parties are frustrated by this. These are the neighbors. These are folks that have lived and created the social fabric of their neighborhoods. And these are developers as well. And so when I think about how we move forward in this agenda, we are living in a 21st century world, right? But we're operating under 20th century, techniques here. We have a zoning code that was built in the 60s. We have an Article 80 process that was built in 1996. It's time that we implement realistic reform that really is community centered and community led. And I'm committed to doing that because we have so many challenges at stake here. As you said, the big issue in Boston right now is affordable housing. How do we incentivize that? How do we make sure that people want to develop that in the city of Boston, whether it's transit-oriented development, more affordable housing, green development? I'm committed to working with neighbors and bringing folks together to achieve that.
So you can just pick it up from there, John Santiago. How would you expand affordable housing in Boston and ensure development without?
Listen, affordable housing is a right that every Bostonian should have access to. And, in the era of COVID, that has been made more clear than anything, right? Housing equals health. On Beacon Hill, I was very proud to be a part of the past, one of the most progressive eviction moratorium bills in the country. We passed a housing choice bill that included some zoning reform across the country. We increased rental vouchers by $150 million. I want us to be innovative in how we think about expanding affordable housing opportunities. For example, Callie, I want to leverage our AAA bond rating. We have an incredible bond rating, a good fiscal situation, but I want that to serve as a coastliner for low-income folks who want to purchase their first home. I want to leverage that bond rating to issue municipal bonds to make sure that renters and CDCs have the equity they need to develop affordable housing. Listen, we have an Office of Housing Stability, and I think it does some good work, but I want it to be as proactive as possible. I don't want to wait till people are suffering, teetering on the edge of eviction. I want us to be proactively checking in with them and making sure that they can stay in their house.
Michelle Wu.
We need to be investing more resources in affordable housing. The city, I've already started the process on the council in partnership with Councillor Kenzie Bach of pushing for the city to expand our use of green and social bonds to directly through our capital budget, invest in affordable housing that is climate resilient. We also need to keep expanding the support for first generation homeowners in the city to close the racial wealth gap. That is the biggest piece of why Boston is one of, if not the most unequal city anywhere in the country. We need to make sure that we're extending emergency protections put in place during the pandemic. I would ensure that we are extending the evictions moratorium until the public health emergency is fully passed. And we need to continue to advocate for stabilization. It's not enough just to generate resources and work with the state and make sure we're, through a transfer tax and vacancy fee, building more. We need to have the tools of rent stabilization so that we're not displacing residents, apply fair housing, so we are keeping communities stable while we're increasing the supply.
Annissa Essaibi George.
Thanks, Callie, for the correction there. Boston's residents, we know every day, all of us know, Boston's residents are struggling to pay rent. Our families can't find or afford stable housing, and too many individuals are experiencing chronic homelessness. COVID-19, we all know, has only emphasized how these realities are so very real for our families, and the effects will last long after the pandemic. In fact, they were here well before the pandemic. As mayor, I will work to create better paths to homeownership and build more affordable housing with a focus on creating generational wealth to break down systemic racism that we see in our housing market and increase equity across every neighborhood. I strongly support the creation of more affordable and workforce housing for working families, for our seniors, and for those living in poverty. Right now, Boston's housing stock is lacking. We need to be sure that we are building housing that will enable Bostonians to live in the city they've contributed so much to.
Andrea Campbell.
Well, I've definitely seen firsthand and felt the effects of the lack of affordability, gentrification, displacement, growing up in Roxbury in the South End. I grew up in public housing at times, affordable housing, and Grant Manor, actually one area that I grew up in Roxbury, is currently facing rent increases. And folks there are fighting to stay in their homes. I have led on many issues as a counselor with respect to solving these issues. My first piece of legislation on the council was the Community Preservation Act. It is generating millions of dollars to create more affordable housing. I've spearheaded a vacant lot initiative. We have hundreds of city-owned vacant lots, sometimes blighted, where I've pushed the city to activate those lots for affordable housing purposes, mixed development projects, and so many other things. I am currently pushing the BHA, Boston Housing Authority, to expand a project that I brought in that is helping people move out of public housing and into homeownership opportunities. As mayor, I will continue that leadership of more ownership opportunities and affordability.
So much of what you all have talked about requires that there be a transparency of the first order. So how would you, because people are even more suspicious now, there's a lot going on for us to be suspicious about, particularly when it comes to government and our leadership.
Callie, I love you and I don't want to interrupt, but I got to answer the affordable housing one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had, I'm sorry.
I spent way too much of my professional life working on affordable
My
housing.
apologies. I'm trying to count. I thought I did it. Go ahead.
No problem, right? Affordable housing is critical. It's critical. It's housing, in fact, I believe is a human right. Much of our success is determined on the social stability of housing and economic mobility. And so for me, as mayor, I'll take the immediate step to create a fund and a land trust in order to prevent evictions and displacement. We've got some real challenges coming out of the pandemic. We've got to answer those immediate threats right away, and it's going to take city intervention and city financial relief to do that. I'd increase affordable housing production and make sure that affordable housing is being done by the area median income of the neighborhood and not the area median income set by the federal government, which is far too high for most of our neighborhoods, which is why many neighbors argue that our affordable housing is not appropriate and not
10
affordable.
seconds.
I would dedicate more city resources to make sure that we have more affordable housing, particularly for seniors and people with disabilities, and make sure that we have more affordable housing for people coming out of homeowners. We'll make sure that we have affordable housing in a way that provides the benefits for a third affordable in all city-owned lands, to make sure that we're leveraging everything we can.
Okay. Catch me if I leave somebody out. I'm so sorry. I overlooked you in that. So let me go back. I was about to proceed with a question about transparency. People are very suspicious of government in general and of leadership, particularly during these tumultuous times. They don't trust decisions made behind closed doors. What would you do to increase transparency in city government? And why should we believe you that you would do it? Annissa, Essaibi, George, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. That's, I think, a great question. And as an at-large city councilor, as a Boston city councilor, those of us that serve on the body know how important it is to be transparent, and we're held to a very high standard when it comes to open meeting law and the ways that we convene. I think that it's very important to do the people's work in public view. It's so important to be engaged in sort of that public process, to be and to be in community as much as possible. I think it's really important that as elected officials, we are engaged in that community process, and that we are very much present in all of the communities in which we serve. And as mayor, serving every community is really important to me. I think it's also important to build a cabinet and build an administration that is also equally connected to communities, whether it's around the expertise in which they lead, but certainly when we think about the diversity of the cabinet, making sure that it is reflective of the entire city and can lead from those experiences.
John Barros.
Well, transparency is critical. And in fact, I think the biggest thing that we gained today was a sense of a government that actually, in fact, works with the verdict, right? That it was about building trust with people, that the legal system can see Black people, can value Black lives. It is critical for government for us to do that. As Chief of Economic Development, the thing that I went into government to do day one was to make transparent the public contracting record for the city. In no time during the city's history has government been doing enough business with minority-owned, people of color-owned businesses or women-owned businesses. And I was set on day one to make sure we had a disparity study that showed the numbers, and so that we can have the legal framework to change that trend. I was able to do that with a successful disparity study that showed that 0.5% and less than 1%, 0.5% for Black-owned businesses and less than 1% for Latino-owned businesses were getting contracts from the city.
John Santiago, you just recently voted that against increasing committee hearings from 7 days, and that would seem to increase more transparency. So why should we believe that you want transparency?
Can you repeat that, Callie? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
You just voted against committee hearings, against increasing them from 3 to 7 days. So why should voters believe that you want more transparency in government?
Actually, I'm not exactly sure what piece of the committee vote you're referring to. I mean, what I can tell you is that I'm committed to having the most transparent city hall that there is, and working hand in hand with advocates to make that a reality. In no case.
Just so we're clear, the notice of the hearings, not the hearings themselves. Go ahead.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, it was a bit of confusion there.
Yeah.
So and nowhere is that more evident than right now with Patrick Rose, right? We see what happens when we don't have transparency in government. And I'm committed to making sure, again, that we have the most transparent city hall. Listen, Callie, as a state rep, I've been very transparent about my own work. In fact, before my website changed to the current campaign one, I posted every single vote that I've ever took in the State House, and I never missed a vote. And this session, in fact, Callie, the House actually voted to post publicly some of these committee votes, particularly the no votes, and those who reserve their rights. So under current House rules, roll calls are now actually posted immediately on 3 different places on the website. That's an increase in transparency.
Okay, Michelle Wu.
This is core and fundamental to me. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My parents also children of immigrants, as my grandparents fled civil war in China. And so there's always been a strong, strong distrust and mistrust of government and politics in my family. And so building that trust, starting with transparency, is key. I'm proud of my record on this. My very first ordinance that I was working on was around data access, and it magically turned into an executive order from the mayor. So I'll say I have made sure to create council notes documenting our votes and upcoming meetings every single week. It is the only source of information of how to follow week to week what the council is doing. I've passed an ordinance to ensure that there's language access and communications access, because there's a lot of changes we need to ensure there's transparency as a baseline. Our data team putting everything up, making sure we're never blocking those public records requests, but that's not enough. It's not just enough for information to be there. We have to connect to community, meet people where they're at, get City Hall out of City Hall, and really have the multilingual cultural access that will actually empower everyone.
Andrea Campbell.
I firmly believe in transparency, and I think the recent Patrick Rose case demonstrates why it's critically important. Had that department been more transparent from the beginning, frankly, more kids would not have become victims. And so it is critically important that we have a government that is transparent. I have always pushed for every department in the city of Boston, not just our police department or the BPDA and other departments, to release information. Every department to release information proactively, to have that live on a website, for it to be regularly updated, including budget numbers. The public schools, our transportation budget is $130 million. People should know that. When it comes to our police department budget, the second largest, $400 million. Overtime budget of close to $70 million. People should know that, because when we are transparent about issues, we then have a sense of the scope of the problem and can then solve with great solutions to solve for them. In addition to transparency, I also believe in timelines and accountability.
So in that recent poll I referenced earlier, of the 552 voters who were asked to weigh in, half of them said they didn't know most of you. So we want to get out not only where you stand on some issues, but maybe some personal stuff. So here's a question for you. Of which one of your favorite restaurants in the neighborhood you live in permanently closed?
I'd say up the street from me, I think. Oh, were you calling on us?
No, go ahead. I see.
And I would imagine that it may be one of Councilor Campbell's, Andrea's favorite restaurants too. Homestead has not reopened, and they did not renew their license last fall. And I'm very sad to think that they may not ever reopen. I'm hopeful that there's still an opportunity for them too. And Homestead's located in the Fields Corner section of Dorchester.
Great. Michelle Wu.
There's actually a couple, which is really sad and painful. From 7 Star Street Bistro, which closed a couple years ago, had been the very first restaurant to have a BYOB license after legislation that I pushed through, to Reds and Rozzy citing liquor license being too expensive, even to Diane's Bakery, right in the center of Rosendale Square. So some of these have been replaced by other new, thriving, amazing options, but we need to make sure that we are really supporting our legacy businesses too, and helping them weather the storm and grow and be able to pass on that wealth as well.
John Santiago.
For me, it's got to be Stella in the South End across from Blackstone, Franklin Park. This was a neighborhood, John, for so many of us, and it closed recently. And so many of us had fundraisers there, events there. It was a great space, and unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic, it closed.
Andrea Campbell.
Actually, I would mention Stella too. Although I live in Mattapan, I would go to Stella for brunch and see my fabulous friends that I grew up with. But also Homestead. I remember when they first opened, a group of Dorchester electeds, Councilor Essaibi, George, and others were there for their grand opening. But this is why, frankly, I put out a restaurant plan. I convened a whole host of restaurant owners, large and small, on ways in which the city could support them in the immediate and also in the long term, and also use the restaurant industry as a way to bring us together in what in many instances is still a very segregated city. So I do hope folks will check that out, but it's Stella and Homestead.
John Barros, this is where you live, right? Literally.
Yeah, ma'am, it is literally sometimes. I have to say Bella Luna and JP. We lost an institution. We lost a place. I can't tell you how many different meetings I've been to there, how many different events, gatherings. The last thing I did with Bella Luna was celebrate our EITC numbers and making sure that residents in Boston were getting as much money back in their taxes as possible. It's an institution, and it's unfortunate that we lost it.
All right, let's move to education. Should the school committee be appointed, elected, or hybrid? And if hybrid, how would you structure it? Annissa, Essaibi, George, this is where
Thanks for
you.
the question. I had a feeling I might get that one first. As a former classroom teacher, I spent 13 years in the classroom. I'm a BPS grad and a BPS parent of 4 high schoolers. I am a true believer in an appointed school committee. I think that it's really important that we don't involve politics any more than it already is in education. I do think, however, and I've been advocating for this as a member of the Boston City Council to the mayor's office, that the appointment should be done in partnership between the mayor's office and the city council. It should certainly be done, the nomination process, through a very transparent and public viewing process, similar to how we've done the community preservation committee work. Both making sure that we've got representation from parents and students, and that the student has the right to vote on the school committee, but that we also engage in conversation and debate and presentation before the city council on other community members who should be at the table.
John Santiago, elected, appointed, hybrid, and if hybrid, how would you do it?
Look, I think this speaks to a bigger issue within the BPS system. Every child in Boston deserves the right to world-class education, and that's not what we have today in Boston. When I look at the students, I see myself in them. The vast majority of them are poor, low income, 42% Latino. For me, this is personal, and I'm glad that when I entered the State House, one of the first things we did, and we advocated for it, was for a Student Opportunity Act that brought once-in-a-generation funds to the Commonwealth. And so when I visit or hear online, the committee hearings, I feel that parents and families and advocates don't have their voices heard. So I'm committed to changing things up and seeing what we can do. And I'm particularly interested in exploring a hybrid model and working with city councilors and the mayor's office to achieve that.
Andrea Campbell.
The 100% appointed has to go. There has been too many examples where the school committee has looked like a rubber stamp for the mayor's office. I actually support a hybrid model. I'm not committed to a specific hybrid model because there are several proposals that I think are great. Some involve the council playing a greater role. Some involve these committee being half elected, half appointed. So there are some good proposals I'm still reviewing. One thing I absolutely support is giving the student a vote. A student should not only get a vote, but we should be engaging more of our students in the process as well. I fully support that, and also pulling in more parents as a possibility to even out the committee in order to allow that student vote.
John Barros, elected, appointed, or hybrid, and how would you do it if hybrid?
Yeah, no, I've been on record saying that I want to have a full conversation on this and wouldn't entertain hybrid, but I start with appointed. As a former school committee member, I agree that we should not bring more politics onto that body. It should not be something that is fully elected for sure. It should be something that we are making sure is representative, and that we're making sure that there's parents on it. And I've been on record as a school committee member that the student representative should have a vote. I've always said that. As a 17-year-old, I was brought onto the board of directors of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and the adults there decided that I would have a vote. It made me an equal partner. It gave me an equal voice. It's important. But I also think the same thing we did on Dudley Street Board was add another student voice. We should add another student seat so they have a partner to talk to and somebody who is a comrade that can help them through it.
Michelle Wu.
Boston Public Schools is the most personal issues for me. I'm a mom in BPS. I have 2 boys, one in K2, one about to start K1 this fall, little guys. And I raised my sister and was her legal guardian through middle school and high school. So I know the system inside out. I know parents do not have a voice. Teachers are not having a voice in the current governance structure. It has to change. I support a majority elected committee to ensure that there's democratic accountability, but then retaining some appointed seats to guarantee representation, right, of racial and ethnic diversity across our city, of geographic diversity, of expertise in there. And that is in the sort of long-term legislative process immediately. If the mayor wanted to tomorrow, She could change the structure so that the appointed seats reflect democratic accountability, designating seats for certain groups through an elections process. But this isn't enough. I've recently released a comprehensive education plan for our schools to transform our system, wrap families around with resources, redo our facilities, invest in vocational education, close the gap for early ed. We need to do more.
So Michelle, I'll start with you on, should we increase the number of charter schools?
No.
Okay. Annissa?
I can add more, but it's a pretty clear-cut answer for me there. We know that our Boston public schools are the schools that will receive anyone. Our Boston public schools are under-resourced right now. We see buildings that are crumbling. I have visited every single Boston public high school, and the moment you set foot in some of these buildings, you can feel just how much these students and educators feel that the district isn't invested in them, isn't valuing them. Walls that are crumbling, windows without shades, lights that are broken. We need to truly invest in our district, support our public schools and our families with those dollars. And you look around the city, there are brand new charter school buildings all around. There needs to be a deeper investment and commitment to make sure that we are lifting up all of our Boston public high schools and elementary school and middle schools for families to value and be excited about these options.
Annissa, Essaibi, George, increase.
I liked that quick answer from Michelle. I want to copy it, but no, I don't think that we should have more charter schools and charter school seats here in the city of Boston. I was actively engaged in that battle a number of years ago, and think that the charter schools do play an important role as they are labs to what we should be and could be doing within the Boston Public Schools. We have a lot to learn through our Boston Public Schools and what could be possible. We hear about the state-of-the-art facilities and the ability to have private investment and the ability to take advantage of certain tax credits. We in the Boston Public Schools, we in the city of Boston, as mayor, I will look for those opportunities, to copy those opportunities, to learn from those opportunities, and look for ways to take advantage of them. The charter schools have taken advantage of the system. They have really, I think, damaged the Boston Public Schools in so many ways. And as mayor of this city, as leader of this city, I will lead the Boston Public Schools to fulfill the promise that it makes to our children and to our children's families.
John Santiago, charter schools, increase them?
Look, I think as mayor of Boston, I'm committed to making sure that BPS works for everyone, Callie, and that's not what we have right now. So yes, we can partner with the charter schools. We can learn from them. We can take their best practices. But right now, as mayor, I'm committed to making sure that every Boston public school has the world-class education that they need.
Andrea Campbell.
Well, it's a state issue, and I think it's been resolved, right? The cap was decided in 2016 and went down in flames. My focus will be on improving Boston Public Schools so every child has access to an excellent education. And this is indeed personal for me. I'm a product of BPS from pre-K all the way through the 12th grade. I went to 5 excellent Boston Public Schools. But the reality today in the city of Boston is that every family does not have access to an excellent BPS education. I live in Mattapan with my 2 beautiful boys. We have a 5% chance of getting my children into a great high quality BPS school compared to certain downtown neighborhoods where it's 80%. So of course, families have to then go elsewhere looking Metco, charter schools, if they're low income, hoping for a scholarship to a parochial private school. I put out a plan 3 years ago before I was a candidate for mayor called Action for Boston Children, keyword action, that had specifics on how we could deliver, deliver an excellent education to every family. As mayor, I will continue that bold and fierce leadership on this critical issue.
John Barros.
Callie, the state school funding process and the formula doesn't work. And that's why, in fact, there's a cap. We have to fully fund Boston Public Schools and make sure that Boston Public Schools have what they need. But charter schools have taught us a lot. Charter schools have done a lot in terms of innovation, and we should be learning from them and partnering with them. And then we should make sure that, in fact, that BPS is the school that gets all of our attention, gets all of our resources. BPS, when I think of BPS, I think of schools like Madison Park. We've got to lean in on Madison Park and make Madison Park the best VOTEC school in the country. There is no reason why in a city like Boston, with the industry that we have, with the excellence in higher education, with all of the leaders that we have in this space, that Madison Park isn't shining. And right now, we're not about the Madison Park.
All right, let's talk about the exam schools and the recent court ruling that waived the test for exam schools. Where are you on that, Annissa, Essaibi, George?
I'm actually a proponent of the exam schools. Taking away the exam schools doesn't fix the disparities in Boston Public Schools. It only delays getting to the real problem, and it truly does distract us from the work that's at hand. We think about the size of our district, 54,000 students, and that's an unfortunately declining number. We'll look at those new census numbers coming soon, and we have focused on where 5,800 students go. The real problem is we have let down our Black and brown students well before they've even considered taking an exam for entrance to one of our exam schools, Latin School, Latin Academy, and the O'Brien. We need to make sure that we are setting up all of our students for success. That starts in pre-kindergarten with strong literacy programs, with making sure we know in the 4th grade, when we look at MCAS literacy scores, we know the trajectory of our students. We have failed them by the time they get to 4th grade. We need to be investing our time, our resources, and our intellect in those early years. I know that my time is up. Happy to continue. Did we lose Callie?
I think we
Looks like
lost.
she's
Yep.
frozen.
Yeah. Annissa, I think you shocked her with your answer.
I did. That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
John, why don't you answer that same question for us? We'll continue
you,
today's
Annissa.
format and
Popcorn and over.
go ahead, John, you're next.
So let me go next, and we can continue to go with the question until she gets back on. My wife went to Boston Latin, and she came out of Boston Latin, went to Dartmouth College, and then she went to Harvard Business School. My brother went to Boston Latin, and he came out of Boston Latin. Today, he's an electrical engineer working for Raytheon. Latin and the opportunities that you have there are transformative, and they, in fact, can end generational cycles of poverty. But they should be made available to all of our students. It should be equal access. And so when my brother and my wife went to Boston Latin, there were quotas, and that's why it was more diverse. The courts have struck down the quotas, so I'm not arguing for quotas, but we have to do as much as we possibly can to make sure that our top students are getting the opportunities that they deserve, that they've worked hard for.
10 seconds.
Right now, I think we're making steps towards that, but we got to do a better job. Now that means that we've got to increase the seats of high achieving schools in Boston, so that we're not fighting for 1 or 2 schools. We got to be able to have more. How's that, Lisa?
Pass it along, John.
Let me pass it over to Andrea Campbell.
Thank you. So I'm a product of Boston Latin School. I graduated from Boston Latin. I started as a 6E. I love Latin School. But I fully supported the 1-year changes that came because, frankly, because of COVID, a lot of folks in my district, young students, could not be expected to show up for exam. But I did say that the family engagement process was a total disaster. And going forward, if we're going to change any admissions policy, every family should have an opportunity to weigh in and also then have time to reflect and then give their feedback to the district. We can do better when it comes to family engagement. That being said, we need to be looking at all of our high schools in a more comprehensive way. We tend to just focus on the exam schools. My twin brother went to Burke High School. At the time, the Burke wasn't even accredited. It did not have the resources and opportunities that a Latin school had. There is a way in the city of Boston to ensure every student has access to pathways and choices into the careers and dreams they envision through our high schools if we invest in a larger comprehensive plan.
Pass it along, Andrea.
Oh, John.
Great, thanks, Counselor. Look, the courts have made a decision to uphold a temporary decision. And the focus really has to be what's next for our exam schools. Look, there's no one here that wants greater diversity in the exam schools than I do. I understand why the previous administration, suspended the exam school admission policy, but I think it's time that we come together as leaders, parents, students alike, to really address the inequity that exists. At the same time, we can't sacrifice the ideals these schools have meant for so long. We need to take a hard look at the admissions process and ensure that every student in Boston has an opportunity to attend an exam school. But it's too late if we're only intervening at the admissions process. As mayor, I want to reform the exam school admission process to make it more equitable and provide opportunities for every student in Boston. And really, that starts with taking a comprehensive approach to the admissions process. And for me, establishing clear and transparent criteria. As mayor, I want to reform the entrance exam to make it to accurately reflect BPS curriculum, because I want to make sure that every kid in Boston public schools has an opportunity to attend schools.
Callie, so our teacher, resident teacher, Annissa, made sure to facilitate while you were gone. We were passing around. I'm the last one left on this question.
Okay,
Thank
good.
goodness you came back. Otherwise, I would have started asking new questions all on my own.
I lost power. I'm so, it's never happened before. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So on the exam schools, I know this intimately as well. As I mentioned, I was a legal guardian for my youngest sister through middle school and high school, and she went to Boston Latin. And so I've been through that whole agonizing process as a family member of a student. What happens if it doesn't work out this way? What will we do? How do we plan for this? Just a feeling of such scarcity because you're told that there's such a narrow pathway to walk for quality resources and academic rigor in our district. And so I also supported the change during the pandemic because it was not possible, not safe, not fair to implement a test with everybody all at once. But we need to make sure that we are providing more predictability for families, not pitting communities and neighborhoods against each other. I believe that as we're talking about future changes to this, we need equity in every part of the process. Thinking about a zip code system is probably too broad. There are too many differences between socioeconomic situations within that. I want to look to other examples, and I want to make sure that we're having the conversation about every single high school seat being high quality.
What would you all do about the lost instructional time? How would you address that? That's impacted all the BPS students. This is a huge issue. I think we're getting data now to show that it's worse than people first imagined. Annissa?
Yeah, I'm a parent of 4 high schoolers, and this last year, plus a few weeks now, has been a tremendous challenge. And when I think about my 4 boys, my 16-year-old who's in the 10th grade, my triplets who are in the 9th grade, they are along a spectrum of loss over this last year. And my children are very well resourced, have access to the technology. The internet has held up fairly well over this last year. And we have so many families who have been unable to support their students in the way that we've had an ability to do here in my home. It's also, I think, very important to note this achievement gap has widened over the last year without a doubt. And I think no one will argue the learning loss that has occurred. But it's also important to note the crisis and the chaos that this has created, the emotional disconnect, issues around mental health, and the need for us to very much double down on both academic and the social and emotional supports our kids need. It has to be our focus today and going forward.
Michelle Wu?
I agree that learning loss is in some ways too narrow a frame to be thinking about the work that lies ahead as we're recovering from the pandemic, getting all of our schools back open safely, ensuring that families are plugged in and students are supported. The pandemic has exposed what was already at crisis level for so many communities through our school system before COVID-19, that our classrooms were overly crowded. And so it wasn't possible to socially distance in the middle of an airborne pandemic, that the buildings were old and only 30 some out of the 125 school buildings had modern HVAC systems and therefore could be safely ventilated. And that we didn't have mechanisms for ensuring that we were connecting families to food access and social emotional supports outside of in-person learning. I've proposed a plan that has some big ideas in it. One of them is wrapping every family around with a family core, putting all the resources that city government has to offer outside the classroom in front of them so that every kid can come to school healthy, happy, and ready to learn.
Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Callie, for this question. It is broader than learning loss. It also includes mental health challenges and all of the other concerns that our families are facing right now. I have been leading on this particular issue, not only in a plan that I've put out as a candidate for mayor, but on the council side, have hosted several hearings with the district to push them to respond right now to meet these needs and also to do more over the summer. The last summer, last year was a missed opportunity. This summer, every student should have access to a tutor. And if we have a limited amount of tutors, stipend our teachers or others in the community to be able to offer their services. In addition, every student should have access to a mental health clinician or social worker. In addition to that, summer opportunities and learning opportunities should be available to our students. Outdoor activities.
10 seconds.
The City of Boston just got $400 million in federal COVID money. The question is, how are we using these dollars to immediately meet the needs of our students, and then long-term, of course, make sure they're okay.
John Santiago.
Thanks, Callie. I think what we're talking about here is a widening achievement gap, right? And I want to be the mayor that finally addresses that. And I want to do that by bringing innovation, investment, and incentives. First, we need to get students in schools right now. Schools are much more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's about social, emotional learning. I mean, the fact is, if you go to my emergency room right now, in the pediatric, psychiatric side, those rooms have doubled. People waiting hours and hours and days for psychiatric bed because of the increasing mental health toll that I've taken. So I see three things when it comes to achieving that or addressing that achievement gap. One, we need to send this COVID relief to fix all the deferred school maintenance, particularly those schools that have served the highest percentage of low-income kids. I finally want to get us to universal pre-K, and I want to fund and incentivize summer learning opportunities to things like increased tutoring. But I also want to bring innovation to the areas of parent engagement. I think a pilot program where we pay
10
parents to get
seconds.
more involved, stuff like that is what gets parents engaged and will result in better student outcomes.
John Barros.
Thanks, Callie. We need to start this summer. This is an opportunity to go year round with structured engagement of our students. And we need to start this summer with summer engagement, summer enrichment in really fun and innovative ways, but in ways that help to support our students get caught up. Too many of them have been left behind further because of the pandemic. And this summer gives us an opportunity to create a year-round model, a model that I've been calling for a very long time as a school committee member and before that. We now need to also take the $400 million that's come into BPS and create a more seamless birth to career educational pathway that supports young people through every stage of their development and prioritizes young people building skills and knowledge that's going to help them thrive, not only in school, but in career and in life. And then we need to spend some money to invest in the
10 seconds.
closing the opportunity gap for students from low-income families, students of color, English language learners, students with disability, to make sure, in fact, that we have in and out of school support for our students, particularly around homelessness and trauma.
All right, now this next round is just a quick answer to this question. What grade would you give Governor Baker, Michelle Wu, on his COVID response?
C-.
John Santiago.
I would give them a C+.
John Barros.
B-.
Andrea Campbell.
I hate these things. A C+, since I have to, Callie.
Okay. Essaibi, George.
As a teacher, I would say that Governor Baker would deserve a B-, but I do think, depending on where you are in the state and what your life circumstances are and what type, what community you come from and what your income is, that grade would vary certainly across the board. We've seen too many of our communities, especially our lower income communities, our Black and brown communities, miss out on the testing opportunities, the vaccine opportunities, the economic opportunities, and have really been injured over this time. So, and then some communities have had access to all sorts of resources. So I'd say, overall, I'd say a B-, but I think that there's, some communities it would be a D, and some communities it would be an A. And that's really unfortunate that we've seen the disparities across our Commonwealth, but in particular across our city of Boston, play out over this last year.
So, okay, so you began to answer my
B-.
all right, B-. You began to answer the second part of my question is, what will you do differently so that your grade would be A?
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. And through my work as the mayor of the city of Boston, I hope as mayor that I never see this pandemic again. But I do know as mayor, we will be in the midst of, because it's already started, a mental health pandemic, a crisis of mental health across all of our communities for sure in our school. It's why I've worked over the last few years and have doubled those efforts to make sure that we have mental health providers full-time in all of our schools, the way I work to make sure that we have a full-time nurse in all of our schools. I will continue on that effort. We've done some of that, especially in partnership with the district and the teachers union to make that a reality. But we need to make sure that we're able to respond to the needs and meet our residents where they are. I've advocated during this time of COVID, and we'll do the same post-pandemic through the mental health crisis to make sure that services are available through community health centers to meet, again, our residents where they are, and to work in partnership. And we've worked on this very actively to make sure Boston EMS, which is mobile, those are our mobile healthcare providers, are able to engage in community very directly.
Okay, Michelle, well, you said C, or C minus. So
C minus.
What would you do differently?
What we saw happening, particularly at the state level, but through other levels as well, was that there was a managing of the political fallout, right? Mitigating the political outrage step by step by step, and then sort of shifting to accommodate that, rather than digging in to make the hard decisions, follow the science, but to build and change underlying structural issues. Almost every step of the way during this pandemic, we knew how it was going to play out. Structural racism, visible and predictable, every step, even through how this vaccination process started. And we're seeing some improvement now that community has really stepped up to push. And so we can't have Band-Aids on deep, long-standing challenges anymore. It is past the time to move with urgency. There's tremendous funding coming down right now. It has to be used to build capacity, solve our underlying structural challenges, and we have to be bold about setting forward a vision for how we'll get there.
Barros.
Yeah, I think, I gave him a B minus, and the B minus was really because we should have seen the resources that were available to the state move more disproportionately to places that were disproportionately impacted, right? It should have followed to communities of color that were hit hard. The numbers showed it. 33% of the deaths during the pandemic were from Black residents. We shouldn't see that kind of disparity and not have immediate response. And we saw it very early on. So we would have to make sure that we would have information in people's languages immediately, PSAs immediately. We should make sure that we have, and hopefully this never happens again, but we would have housing for people who were underhoused. Because too many families in our neighborhood who were poor didn't have enough space to quarantine. We should have more access and more mobile testing sites early on. There's historic distrust, and so we should have had partnerships with community very early on as well.
John Santiago.
Look, I mean, we have to be very honest here. I sit as the vice chair of the COVID-19 committee, where we do our best to hold the governor accountable. And the beginning was quite bumpy. The vaccination rollout was incredibly tough for a lot of people out there. So that C+ was very much merited, but we have to give them credit that things have improved. I would put them at almost a B right now. Now, there are still some deficits with respect to equity, and that's why I got so frustrated with waiting around that I started an initiative, with a couple of doctors and a couple of community groups to vaccinate low-income Black and brown people across the city of Boston. And we're up to 1,000, Again, this is what I bring to this race as someone who's a doer, someone who's committed to getting things done, and someone who's ready to work with urgency. We vaccinated 1,000 people, those that are Black, brown, disabled, and otherwise would not have been vaccinated. Those people that I would have seen in my emergency room, intubated, hospitalized, and dead. So look, we've made some significant improvements, and I got to give a lot of credit to Governor Baker and the legislature, but we have a lot more work to do.
Andrea?
So I gave a low grade because it was a rocky start when it came to vaccinating communities of color, low-income communities, opening testing sites and getting them online. But I want to take this in a very different direction, because the thing that has not been addressed, where I would give an F, is the other public health crisis that is going on in the city of Boston, and that is the opioid crisis. What we're seeing at Mass and Cass, in some of our downtown neighborhoods. I sent a letter to the governor and our former mayor months ago, pushing forward for ideas on ways in which the city of Boston could respond more impactfully and effectively to the opioid crisis, along with pushing the governor to have a regional approach to helping the city of Boston deal with this public health crisis. I've continued to work on this issue. I'm the only candidate with a plan to respond to this issue, and sent that to the administration. sent it to the former mayor, sent it to candidate Janie, because this is the other public health crisis that we need to get under wraps. It is a travesty when you have people laying on the ground and you don't know if they're dead or alive in the city of Boston. Absolutely unacceptable.
All right, now I have a series of yes and no questions. I know you hate that, Andrea Campbell, but these are questions.
If they're fun and they like lighten it up a little bit, I love it.
So these are questions for voters. They want to know that, remember, most people don't know you all. So this is an opportunity for you to at least have your voice on some of these questions. And so we're going to do yes and no, Annissa, Essaibi, George, this round. All right, here we go. The city council currently has very little ability to influence the budgeting process. Would you support legislation to enable line item budgetary changes? Michelle Wu, yes or no?
Yes.
Annissa Essaibi, George.
Yes.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
John Barros.
No.
And John Santiago.
No.
Okay. Would you support charter change to allow for ranked choice voting in Boston? John Santiago, yes or no?
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
Yes to pick the two for the final, but not to eliminate the preliminary election altogether.
We're going out of yes and no. Annissa, what do you say? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
John Barros.
Yes.
Do you support removing police from Boston Public Schools? John Barros.
Yes.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
Annissa.
Boston police are not in the Boston Public Schools.
So that's, where is that? Was that a yes or a no?
They're not there, so there's no question to remove them.
Police from Boston Public Schools, I'm sorry.
Say again?
You support removing police from Boston Public Schools?
No.
No. So that's 2 yeses, 1 no. John Santiago, where are you?
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
You support requiring the police department and other city agencies to get city council approval before acquiring new surveillance technologies or military equipment? Yes or no? John Santiago.
I'm sorry, you said city council approval? Is that what you said?
Requiring the police department and other city agencies to get city council approval before acquiring new surveillance technologies or military equipment.
No, I think as the mayor, I would make that decision.
All right, Michelle Wu.
Yes, I filed the ordinance.
Okay. Annissa.
Yes.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
John Barros.
Yes.
You support ending information sharing between the Boston Police Department and ICE? Yes or no? Annissa.
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
Yes, that's also in the ordinance.
Okay. John Santiago.
Yes.
John Barros.
Yes.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you support shuttering the Boston Police Gang Database? Yes or no, John Barros?
No.
Andrea Campbell.
Working on it.
Okay, is that a yes or no?
I'm the one leading the conversation on this, so I'm in the middle on this one, Callie, right now.
Annissa.
No.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
John Santiago.
Not at this time.
Would you support a hard cap on overtime for individual officers? If so, what percentage of an officer's salary? So that's 2 parts to this yes and no. John Barros, hard cap,
Yes.
what percentage of an officer's salary?
30%.
Okay. Andrea Campbell, hard cap,
Yes.
what percentage?
I don't know that yet.
Annissa, hard cap?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. John Santiago, hard cap?
No hard cap.
All righty. Michelle Wu.
Yes, I don't have a number, and it's also about the total overtime cap too.
Okay.
And I'd also say, Callie, if I could just for clarification, there is currently regulation around the overtime budget and how many hours an officer can work in a given week.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there is guidance on this, so it does
There's
exist.
some very specific guidance.
That's right.
Voters have now heard you. Do you support safe consumption sites? Yes or no? Michelle Wu.
Yes, but the citing decision is important.
John Santiago.
I do, but it's important how we think about these safe consumption sites. And I will say that the South End has played their role in this epidemic in Roxbury and should not be considered as a location.
Okay, all right, okay. John Barros.
Only as part of a continuum of service to get people off of the substance.
Y'all are testing yes or no. Andrea.
Yes, as a part of my larger comprehensive plan to respond to the opioid crisis.
Annissa.
Follow instruction, no.
Do you support a real estate transfer tax for commercial and residential sales with the revenue going to an affordable housing trust? Annissa.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
John Barros.
Yes.
John Santiago.
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
Okay, second part. What exemption threshold, if any, would you advocate for? That's a number. Annissa.
I think 2 million.
Michelle Wu.
Yep, that's in the home rule petition that we sent up. That's the threshold, and I support that.
Okay, Andrea Campbell, do you
I
support?
support that as well.
Give me credit. I'm not on mute.
2 million.
John Santiago?
To be determined.
Okay. If Massachusetts lifted the ban on rent control ordinances, would you seek to pass one? John Barros.
No.
Andrea Campbell.
I want to say yes, but need to have a conversation with small landlords, particularly those owned by people of color.
Annissa.
No.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
John Santiago.
No.
Do you support requiring that a majority of new affordable units be built on site in order to ensure communities are diverse and integrated? John Barros.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
Annissa.
On site, yes.
Okay, Michelle Wu.
On site, yes.
John Santiago.
I think we need to provide some flexibility to the developer and to the community.
That's a no at this moment. Okay. Would you support the creation of a municipal broadband network? John Santiago.
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
I have a digital equity plan. Yes, I'll explore it. There's lots more to it, but we will make sure we close those gaps.
Annissa.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Did I get you, John Barros, on this?
No, you didn't, but yes, Callie, I would.
Okay. Do you support allowing non-citizens with legal status the right to vote in municipal elections? John Barros.
Yes, I would.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes, led the conversation. Got a lot of hateful emails.
Okay, Annissa.
No.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
John Santiago.
Not at this time.
Okay. Do you support allowing 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in municipal elections? I'll start with you, John Santiago, again.
Yes.
Michelle Wu.
Yes.
Annissa Essaibi George.
No.
Andrea Campbell.
Yes.
John Barros.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we got all the yes and no's out. Let's talk about some other stuff. Economic development. So acting Mayor Kim Janey just announced $2 million in funds committed by the former mayor, Marty Walsh, to increase supplier diversity. You said, Michelle Wu, that it was paltry. Would you elaborate on that?
I've been proud to lead the charge on making sure there's accountability and urgency to act in aligning Boston, putting our money where our mouth is. We are spending more than $660 million a year of discretionary funds. When Councilor Pressley and I first passed the ordinance for accountability, less than 1% was going to businesses owned by people of color. And after a big push and back and forth, we now have a 5-year look back that shows it was now up to 2.5%. Other cities, major cities, are well over 20%, well over 30%. Boston should be leading the way, settling at 10%, maintaining that goal is simply unacceptable. We're losing out. It's short-sighted in terms of not investing in our own communities, not creating wealth to close the racial wealth gap. We benefit so much as a city if we are taking taxpayer dollars, plugging it right back into our neighborhoods. And so we should be aiming much higher, but also taking action to put forward a plan. I have one to make sure that we are really expanding access and leading the way on this issue.
Annissa, how do you feel?
Can you re-ask the question? I'm sorry, Callie, thanks.
Okay. Acting Mayor Janey just announced $2 million in funds committed by former Mayor Marty Walsh to increase supplier diversity.
Yeah.
And you just heard what Michelle Wu said.
Yep,
So,
yep.
yeah.
No, I think, the supply diversity issue is a very real issue. On the Boston City Council, I have just recently filed a home rule petition that would increase or make it easier. I'm sorry, it would break up the large contract requests that go out to our vendors, to our potential suppliers across the city of Boston and beyond. We need to make it easier for our locally owned operations and operators and businesses, our Black and Brown owned, our female owned businesses to be able to bid on these projects. We have to create that very direct access. That's how we create wealth. Certainly excited about the investment of acting Mayor Janey in this effort, but we need to do more. We need to change state law. We need to work in partnership with the State House to make that happen. And we need to engage with our locally owned businesses across our city of Boston to make sure that they are able to get in and do this work with us at the city of Boston.
John Santiago.
Great, thanks, Callie, for the question. Look, immediate reform is necessary, in order to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses will get their fair share of city contracts. Now is not the time for another study. We don't need another diversity study. What we need is action, because this is ultimately how we begin to build wealth in communities of color. And as mayor, I want to invest $5 million in technical assistance for minority business enterprises. I think we need to streamline and simplify these applications to really maximize eligibility. We need to make sure that they can, have the business certificates they need to get out the contracts that they can get. So as mayor, I also want to make sure that we are demanding regular reporting to really ensure that our targets are finally being met. And I have the relationships with the State House right now to get work done up there when it comes to unbundling contracts, and I'm committed to doing that as the next mayor of Boston.
John Barros.
Callie, I'm glad that the acting mayor announced the $2 million that we secured last year in last year's budget. And it's really important that we continue to invest in this space. So I was glad to lead that effort to get the 2 million plus. We need to go in and make sure that we continue to do the work that we started in the city and finish it. I was really excited to have awarded the largest contract to any minority-owned business in Boston's history with a $2 million professional service contract recently awarded. The work that has started needs to be completed by us making sure that we can create accessible bonding level, that we can create working capital for small businesses to do business with the city, that we can make procurement a lot simpler with affirmative marketing, and making sure that we're bidding to minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses in a way that allows them to access the contracts.
Andrea Campbell.
So this is about the racial wealth gap, at least for me, critically important. $8 for a Black family. For some Latinx and Latino families, it is $0. Nearly $250,000 for a white family. The racial wealth gap has actually gotten worse, not better. I think it's a step in the right direction, but we need far more resources to be invested here. You're talking about a city of Boston budget that is over $3.7 billion. We need to be leading the way so that every small business owner, especially women of color, or such say women and people of color, have access to capital, technical assistance, mentoring, everything they would need to be able to start a business in Boston and grow it. But if we lead as a city, then other industries follow. The hospitals, the healthcare institutions, of course, the higher ed institutions, the private sector, and also diversifying their supplier relationships and diversifying their businesses, not just supplier relationships, who's their lawyers, who's their tax accountants, et cetera. Really important.
All right, we're gonna pause briefly for Jonathan from the Ward Committee sponsoring this forum to make a comment, and I'm coming back with one last question before we sign out. So Jonathan.
Okay, and I don't know if I'm being spotlighted or if people can see me or not, because okay, people can see me. Jonathan Cohen, I'm the chair of Ward 4. Wanted to give a kind of a quick thank you from Wards 4 and 5. Shout out to Sharon, who was here earlier before we close. Wards 4 and 5 are frequent collaborators on candidate forums that provide opportunities for these important conversations for the city. We will be having an at-large forum, like an at-large city council forum in June, on June 24th. Sharon will be putting a note into the chat about that if people want to mark that on their calendars and sign up for the Eventbrite already. We'd love for your continued engagement on the local level. Here in Ward 4, we cover parts of Back Bay, Fenway, and the South End. Ward 5 covers Back Bay, Bay Village, Beacon Hill, and Fenway, and a little sliver of the South End. In Chinatown, Sharon and I will both put stuff in the chat on that. Thank you to all of the candidates here, and thank you to our amazing moderator, Callie, who's been doing a fantastic job, and thank you to all of the audience. And then back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Last question. As we look at Earth Day, the anniversary, the annual celebration of Earth Day, I wonder if each of you could share your number one initiative, program, idea that you think would make us have better climate resilience in Boston from your perch as mayor. I'll start with you, Andrea.
Well, one, we all know climate, at least in Boston, climate change is real, and that environmental injustices have existed sadly in our city for generations. And I've not only experienced them as a Black woman, of course, but also growing up in Roxbury, where sadly in Roxbury, you have still some of the highest asthma rates, not just in Boston, but in the state. And so put out a very thoughtful plan that addresses these issues and also speaks to the fact that I'm still very much living, along with my family, with these injustices in Mattapan. We're still seeing them in my district, the flooding, extreme heat, higher pollution rates, you name it. And so I do think, number one, it's critically important that we center communities of color. I was shocked to learn that some of our climate maps in the city of Boston did not even include Mattapan, my neighborhood. So we need to center communities of color in this movement, because if we don't, it will absolutely fail. And then of course, make sure that they get jobs and everything else coming out of this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. John Barros.
Thanks, Callie. You know, my first activity as a young person getting involved in my neighborhood was around environmental justice. It was cleaning up a lot that had been dumped on by contractors that really was messing up our neighborhood. And in fact, a lot of the asthma rate in Roxbury that we suffer because of bad business practices. And so we got together as a neighborhood and started to work to make sure to improve those practices. It's important that we all play our part. The most important thing to do right now, Callie, would be to accelerate the city of Boston's plan to become carbon neutral by 2050. We need to make sure that we are partnering with private business to make sure that their carbon reduction standards and plans are in alignment. We need to make sure that we invest in retrofitting our resident homes and create ability to do that. And then we also need to make sure to plant more trees and improve air quality and combat urban heat island effects.
John Santiago.
Thanks, Callie. You know, I'm proud to have played a role in one of the most productive and progressive legislative cycles in recent memory. And an important bill that we finally got over the hump this past last month or so was a bill that we had to vote for 4 times, and was the 2050 Climate Roadmap Bill. And that bill did 3 things. It was one of the most progressive pieces of legislation in the country when it comes to the environment. It had strict targets for emission standards to get us to net zero by 2050. It finally codified environmental justice, and it increases renewable energy and doubles down on our investment in wind. So what does that mean for Boston? For me, I think it starts with carbon neutrality, and I want to see a decrease in emissions with respect to some of the two largest emitters. For me, that's transportation, right? I believe we have to heavily invest in our transit infrastructure by having more dedicated bus lanes, protected bike lanes, and really to increase the reliability and availability of public transport. And that's important when it comes to development as well. I want to be the mayor who's going to focus on getting transit-oriented development, because I know how important that is, because I don't have a car. I take the T, I take the bus, and I'm committed to making sure that everyone has great access to transportation.
Annissa.
Well, we know that the impacts of climate change are real and a threat here in Boston. And while climate action is definitely about emissions and building greener buildings, it's also about environmental justice. We need to be very honest about this conversation and make sure that this conversation is happening in our communities across our city. And we know that so many of our communities are disproportionately impacted by climate. And our climate actions must begin with the frontline communities whose health and safety are most at risk. As a city councilor on the city council, I've been a strong advocate for increasing energy efficiency, especially in our Boston Public Schools buildings, which make up the majority of our city-owned buildings. It's where we need to focus and can easily focus so many of our efforts. I would also want to make sure that we are including our students at Madison Park
10 seconds.
High School to participate in this green economy, to do this work. We need to train them for the workforce of tomorrow. It's about climate mitigation and the work that needs to be done in our city, but also to make sure that our young people have access to those opportunities.
And Michelle Wu.
We need a Boston Green New Deal. I think about this every day as a mom. My older son is 6 years old now, and when Blaze was born, he was born in December. That was a year that was the first in a very long time. That was the hottest year on record. I remember being shocked at that, right? 200 plus years of collecting records, hottest year ever. And then every single year after that, turns out all 6 of his years alive have been the 6 hottest years on record on this planet, right? We are past crisis, and aiming for 2050 is not good enough. If we hit these thresholds by 2050, there's a 50-50 chance we'll stay under the right temperature thresholds. No one wants just a coin flips chance for our kids, our grandkids to survive and thrive. So we need to be ambitious. We need to be bold. I'm proud to have introduced the first Green New Deal, city level Green New Deal anywhere in the country, and to have been endorsed by the Sunrise Movement in Boston, by Bill McKibben and so many others who have worked on national climate organizing. Boston could really lead the way. We are one of the most vulnerable, climate vulnerable cities anywhere in the world, but we have such incredible activism and organizing here. We just need to break down these silos, recognize that climate justice is racial and economic justice. Our plan lays out 15 specific policies, from housing justice to—
All right, well, I want to thank wards 4 and 5 for sponsoring this debate, 5 months till the election. And thank you all mayoral candidates for joining us tonight and giving us your time to answer these questions. Thank you so much. Good night.
Callie, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.